Welcome to Hoosier Game Day, presented by the Hoosier Network. I'm Abel Wegenke, and alongside me, Nick Abel. Indiana plays in the Big Ten Championship on Saturday against Ohio State, a game that many fans may have thought Indiana may not make this season, but nonetheless, the Hoosiers are 12-0 and undefeated for the first time in program history. Now they get a rematch against Ohio State nearly 1 year later. Nick, this is a huge game for the Hoosiers, but I think before we get into this, we got to talk about what happened last week against the rival Purdue. Indiana wins that 56-3. They take home the Old Oaken Bucket for the second year in a row. Huge celebration. Lots of Hoosier fans showing up in West Lafayette. There was almost a sea of crimson by the end of it, and honestly, even the beginning of that game, but nonetheless, Indiana defeating in all places. Nick, give me a couple takeaways from that game.
Yeah, it's another dominant performance from Indiana against a inferior opponent, and Purdue has struggled all season, didn't have a Big Ten win, and they weren't going to get one against the Hoosiers. All facets of the game, even though Mendoza looked a little bit sluggish out of the gate, the cold weather might be affecting the Miami native, but the run game, dominant. The defense put Purdue in a locker for 4 quarters and looked easy for most of the second half. We got to see more Alberto Mendoza and the Hoosiers' second string get a little more rest before what is going to be the biggest game potentially in Indiana history this weekend.
For sure, Nick. And I do think that cold affected Mendoza. Cignetti even kind of said it himself this week. Fortunately for the Hoosiers, though, every place from here on out is pretty climate controlled,
Yeah.
give or take Miami. But hey, that's where he's from, so he's pretty used to that Miami weather. But they did turn to that run game a lot. You mentioned that they had some really great production on that run offense, and we've seen them use the pass a lot lately. So it was good to kind of see that run offense just get in there more in this Purdue game. But I think something notable that Curt Cignetti said about this Purdue game afterwards was that he pushed his players to just do more and be a little bit better every quarter than what they have in the past few weeks. He just says, against Wisconsin and the game before that, he felt like they were almost in this like lull in a sense. He didn't use the word lull, but that's kind of the vibe he was going for, and he just wanted their focus this game was to really have this team push themselves and try to sharpen up some things, notably before this Ohio State game, Nick.
And they did, and you talked about the run offense. The only thing we hadn't really seen was breakout runs from the back committee. And you saw Hemby have his longest touchdown of his collegiate career. He looked phenomenal. You're going to need him this week. Kalon Black, just such a bruising, tough, physical running back who's going to get the job done. And then even when you bring in Kobe Martin, the underclassman, he's shown capabilities to produce big plays. So having that depth at running back and trusting your now healthy O-line to get push on the line of scrimmage is super important against the best team you're going to see all year.
Yeah, and I want to take away something from this defense of the Purdue game. Stephen Daly had himself quite a game, and really since he's gone in, he was in a little bit when Kellen Wyatt was still playing. Then Kellen Wyatt gets the injuries out for the season. And so then they really had to turn to Stephen Daly, which he was ready to go. Curt Cignetti is all about next man up. And I just feel like every single week we've seen more and more from Stephen Daly. A lot of great stuff. But that Purdue game, he really kind of just stood out amongst the defense, Nick.
Yeah, most tackle for losses in the country. Maybe the biggest snub out of all of the Big Ten postseason awards. We can get into that. He has been a game wrecker. He has more tackles for loss than Aiden Hutchinson had in his near Heisman campaign for Michigan. He's been so influential on the defensive line. That's really been the strength of the defensive unit for the entire season. You mentioned it, the next man up mentality from him and the rest of the squad has been so huge for Indiana. It was the depth last year that hurt them down the stretch. Now they have that depth. Now they feel comfortable. They're 12-0 for the first time in program history. And they get a chance to do something that they haven't done in a long time and then potentially go fight for a national championship.
Well, the Big Ten released their postseason awards earlier this week, and let's break down the defense side of it first. There were a lot of players on defense, notably on first team. You had Aiden Fisher, D'Angelo Pons, Tucker, and Lewis Moore. I mean, and then we mentioned Stephen Daly earlier. Yep. He only got an honorable mention. And then you also had other players like Farrell and Brady and just a bunch of other guys making that second type of third team. Is this what you expected to see from the Indiana defense? Do you almost disagree with some of the things that the Big Ten chose?
I was a little bit surprised to see how well the Indiana linebackers did comparing the unit that Ohio State has. Arvell Reese we'll get into when we talk about the game. But not that surprised. This defense statistically has been up there with every other unit in the country and dominates pretty much for 4 quarters, only a couple of big plays, not a lot of touchdowns given up. The defense has been the stronghold of this team, even when the offense is slowed in some of those bigger games. And then you know what you get out of Mendoza. You know what you get out of your wide receiving tandem. That Cooper got a second team and Surratt got a second team. I mean, you're 12-0. You're going to get awards, and that's the benefit of being one of the 2 undefeated teams in the country.
Yeah, well, and Fernando Mendoza winning Offensive Player of the Year and Quarterback of the Year for the Big Ten, 2 really big awards. Great things for this Indiana program. Carter Smith also notably earning first-team offensive lineman. And then you also have Nico Radicic, who won Kicker of the Year. He has not missed a single thing all season, and honestly, that's almost been consistent off of 2 seasons.
Yeah.
Hence the one time in the Purdue game last year. But, you know, he's been a phenomenal kicker for this Indiana team, and that's something really important that I think, you know, maybe not a lot of people think of, but it's essential. Nonetheless, though, this Indiana offense is so stacked, but also, like you said, Ohio State is stacked, and there's a bunch of other teams in this conference whose offenses are stacked. But it was huge to see, you know, at least Smith and Mendoza getting that first-team spot, and arguably it almost leads me to wonder, at least, if Elijah Surratt was not out for a couple games with that hamstring injury, would he have been a first-team wide receiver?
Yeah, you would think he'd be right there in the conversation. It's tough to overtake Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate, who both won the first-team awards and are both the wide receiver matchups that the Hoosiers will have this weekend. But he was so good early on in the year before the injury, and right when he came back, he got the touches he needed to get comfortable. Carter Smith has been one of the most underrated players in the country. If you're not watching O-line play, which I can't blame a lot of people for, but he has been ridiculously good at left tackle, and now you get Evans back to the right of him. The offensive line starting to gel at the right time. They've given Mendoza time in the pocket and the running backs lanes to run, and they've taken full advantage.
Drew Evans did come back in that Purdue game.
Yes.
We forgot to mention that Drew Evans did come back and rejoin in that Purdue game, which is huge for this Indiana line. He was wearing a hefty brace on that right ankle, which is expected, but a huge, you know, a great addition for Indiana coming into this Ohio State game. But I think the last Big Ten award that we need to touch on is Curt Cignetti winning Coach of the Year for the second year in a row. Made a lot of Hoosier fans happy. Nick, what was your initial reaction to that?
I mean, Curt Cignetti, we've talked about it time and again on this show. You cannot rave enough about the job he's done with Indiana. 23-2 in 2 seasons. Ridiculous stuff for the head man of Indiana, coming from James Madison, who also has a chance to make the playoff. It'll be interesting to see what happens this weekend. But he has just revitalized the program. They have recruits that they would have never had under former administrations. He said it himself, emerging superpower of college football, and now he gets a chance to prove it on the big stage for the second year in a row. And we'll see what the Hoosiers have come this big game and then later on.
Well, before we get to that, college football playoff rankings, Indiana is still at number 2. If the playoff were to start right now, they would have a bye and be playing the winner of A&M and Notre Dame. Am I correct? Yep. Okay. So kind of, you know, is that scary to you, the fact that the Hoosiers maybe would have to see Notre Dame again, or are you feeling a lot better about it this time?
I think a lot of Hoosier fans are groaning about what would be that draw. It's going to change a lot this weekend. But Notre Dame started off 0-2, have slaughtered everybody else. And those 2 losses were Miami and A&M. So really good teams they lost to. Jeremiah Love is probably going to be in New York for that Heisman finalist ceremony. And C.J. Carr has been outstanding as a young quarterback. You just know that that Notre Dame team comes to play in the postseason, made a national championship last year. I think nobody would be more excited to see Notre Dame than Pat Coogan, transfer center, who also got a nod in the Big Ten Awards. I think Cignetti would love to get a chance to right the wrong, so to speak, not only this weekend, but then potentially Notre Dame. They'd have to get through a really tough A&M team as well. Marcel Reed, phenomenal quarterback there.
Absolutely, and nothing is locked in place. The final selection show will actually be Sunday following the Big Ten championship game, and that's where you're going to find out if the Hoosiers get to keep their bye week and ultimately who they would be playing and where, essentially, they could be in. Depending again results against Ohio State, Hoosiers could end up in Pasadena, Dallas, Miami. It's really a plethora of places right now and a plethora of teams that they could see, but it's going to be really interesting to see who they draw. And notably on Monday, we will also be seeing who the Heisman finalists are. Fernando Mendoza still leading the odds in that. But, you know, just getting to kind of see a final stamp of approval that the quarterback will be going to New York. When we come back, more on this Ohio State matchup. Welcome back to Hoosier Game Day. No.2 Indiana takes on No.1 Ohio State in the Big Ten Championship up in Indianapolis. Nick, it's a huge game for these Hoosiers. It's a rematch almost a year later. You know, I think Indiana has had a chip on their shoulder ever since that game last year. They told us in media earlier this week that they don't really talk about it, but it's always been there. It's always looming in the back of their minds. And so this week they get a chance to rehash that out and hopefully defeat Ohio State would be their ultimate goal and secure that spot in the Big Ten Championship and obviously, or not the Big Ten Championship, in the college football playoff and that first round bye. Curt Cignetti said in his press conference on Monday, I think this was a little bit almost shocking, that the moment became too big for them in that Ohio State game last year. And this year they're hoping that be a little bit different. And I also want to note that Kaelon Black in his media this week with us on Tuesday said that this Indiana team playing Ohio State and really this season in general versus last year's Indiana team, he called this year the new Indiana. He said this is a lot different for a lot of different reasons. Nick, what is kind of your initial reaction to that?
I think Kaelon's right. This team just pushes the edge a little bit more than they did last year. Cignetti talked about the silent count struggles at Ohio State last season, and the moment was too big. They really got beat pretty handedly. Ryan Day was not afraid to run up the score also with the fake kneel, scoring a touchdown to put them up 3 scores with just when they could have ran out the clock. Cignetti makes note of that. The guys who were there last year make note of that. You get everything and more with this Indiana team. 1 versus 2. What else can you ask for? It's the first time a conference championship has been the overall 1 and 2 since 2009 when it was Florida, Alabama. This is going to be potentially the game of the season. You look at every statistical category, it's pretty much Ohio State, Indiana, Ohio State, Indiana. You go down the line, quarterback, finalist, Heisman Trophy, San Mendoza, running game, wide receiver ability, defensive standouts who are going to be NFL players. It's going to be a ton of fun no matter the outcome. The fact that it's in Indy, in the backyard of Bloomington, just 50 minutes away, it's going to be a good crowd. You know the Columbus crew travels everywhere. You got to respect the Ohio State fandom. They know how to win games like this. They have 39 Big Ten championships to the Indiana's 2. And the Hoosiers don't have any since the Big Ten championship game was established in 2011. Perfect opportunity to right that wrong. I mean, come on. This is everything you want in college football matchup.
Absolutely, and it is Indiana's first time going to this Big Ten championship game in program history, so a huge opportunity for the Hoosiers. Granted, though, Ohio State, same chip on their shoulder. They want to keep their #1 spot. They haven't been to this game in a few years, so they're excited to be there. And I think it's also, you talk about the fans. I think that it's a neutral field. I really do think that the split will be pretty 50-50, but the ticket prices right now, I mean, it's like getting the door is $600 and you're sitting up way up in the rafters of Lucas Oil. You'll be watching that big screen because you're not going to see anything on that field. If you want to be a little bit closer though, I mean, you're shelling out a few $1,000s. It's the most expensive. I saw the stat the other day. It's the most expensive Big Ten championship game in history. You know, people really want to see the Indiana Hoosiers and the Ohio State Buckeyes. But let's dive more into the football matchup of this game. Let's start with the quarterbacks. You have Fernando Mendoza against Julian Sayin, two Heisman favorites. Arguably, whoever wins and plays a better game on Saturday could take the Heisman. I want to pose a question to you, Nick, though. Fernando has kind of led in the odds the Heisman race for quite a few weeks now. Do you think that if Indiana were to lose on Saturday, but Fernando played a heck of a game, could he still win that Heisman Trophy, or do you think it should go to Sayin or somebody else?
It would take a ridiculous performance from Mendoza with a loss to win the Heisman, and Sayin would need to look bad, which realistically, chances are if they win the game and Mendoza looks good, Sayin's also going to look good. So I don't foresee a future where that outcome is possible. You kind of said it. It's pretty simple. Whichever team wins the game, most likely, is going to also win the Heisman. We'll have the #1 seed in the college football playoff. We'll remain the only undefeated team in college football. Everything's at stake in an era where people are kind of weary of conference championship games because, as you saw last year, Ohio State didn't make the conference championship. They didn't need to. They lost to Michigan. Didn't matter. They still win the national championship, get the ultimate award of the season. But for the Hoosiers team that's trying to rewrite history and hasn't ever been to a Big Ten championship game, this feels like one of those matchups that you just have to win to prove your worth and to really silence every doubter, because there are still some, surprisingly. We thought they'd be quiet after Autzen and Oregon, but when you are historically as bad as Indiana has been, everybody's going to be questioning your ability to win big football games. And if you can beat Ohio State this weekend, you could change the narrative for not only the rest of the postseason, but really the rest of Curt Cignetti's tenure at Indiana.
What do you like about Julian Sayin's play at quarterback?
For being a first-year starter, Julian Sayin is as comfortable under duress as any quarterback in college football. Now, granted, he hasn't seen a ton of pressure, but he's got the highest completion percentage in the country. He's got the best QBR in the country. He only has 5 interceptions, the same amount as Mendoza. And he does what he needs to do, knowing the crew of NFL players he has around him, the caliber of wide receiver and the freshman running back, Bo Jackson. He doesn't make a lot of mistakes, and that is where Ohio State will kill you because they're so efficient on both sides of the ball. If you make any sort of mistake, as we saw Michigan last week in the big game, they couldn't finish off drives. Then they got backed up. Bryce Underwood in the offense got shut down by the defense that's done it to everyone. Sayin will make you pay, and he'll find the deep ball to Jeremiah Smith. If you put him on an island, he's going to find ways to score. He is the best wide receiver in the country, and it's not really that close. But Sayin has done everything that Ryan Day has asked of him and more, and you don't see a player like this all that often this early on in their career that's as comfortable and as cool under pressure. And I know there hasn't been a lot of close games for the Buckeyes, but there's a reason he's right there in the Heisman running.
So where do you see Indiana's defense needing to step up and really pay attention to this Indiana offense and, Jeremiah Smith?
Yeah, you meant it's the secondary that I'm sure the Indiana fans are a little bit nervous about. Even though last year when these two teams matched up, Smith only had 35 yards. It was his second lowest total outside of their first playoff game. Pons played with Jeremiah Smith in high school. Kind of fun there, a good tidbit. But the D-line has to continue to be a game breaker. We talked about Daly. Tyreek Tucker getting that first team nod. Sayan has only been sacked 6 times, as I just said. If you can start to ramp up the pressure, especially if you're only bringing 4 rushers, it's going to affect everything Ohio State wants to do. Bo Jackson kind of ran wild in the second half against Michigan. Because they had a lead in the O-line, looked really good for the Buckeyes. It was the thing coming into that game and really for most of the season that Buckeye fans were a little bit concerned about. Maybe their weakest strength is the O-line. If you can win the line of scrimmage defensively and put pressure on Sand to make contested throws and force a turnover, you're going to have a great chance to win the game.
Well, Nick, all episode you've been wanting to talk about Caleb Downs. Can you kind of just tell us about the type of player that he is for the Ohio State Buckeyes?
Oh, I will rave about Caleb Downs more than anybody else. This safety is the best safety in the country. I think he's the best player at his position in all of college football, and I don't think it's particularly close. I already said he's better than his NFL brother, Josh Downs, who Indianapolis fans are very notable about as a Colts player. But he does everything for this defense as a safety, which is an undervalued position just because of, not necessarily involved in every play. You don't get the coverage aspect of a cornerback or the ability to game wreck like an edge rusher, but they'll put him in a ton of different situations. He can go out and cover. He can tackle. He can play one high, which he will do. Mendoza talked about it this week. Game planning for him is like Tom Brady game planning for Ed Reed. He does so many things well. And if you make one mistake, we saw a couple of throws against Purdue that could have been turnovers. You make those throws in the vicinity of Caleb Downs, he's going to make you pay. He had a touchdown against Indiana last year on a punt return. That was a botched punt, but still, that was kind of the turning point in that football game. If you make a mistake against this Buckeyes defense and Downs, they are going to jump all over you and take advantage, just like they have all season long. Michigan, they were down 6-0. It was their largest deficit of the entire year, 6 points, not even a full touchdown score. This team does so many things well, and their defense is ranked just about first in every category. Passing, least amount of pass yards, least amount of yards per play, least amount of points, 8.5 allowed per game. The Hoosiers offense is going to have to game plan really. They're going to have to get deep in their bag. They're going to have to do a lot of things differently that Matt Patricia hasn't seen. Probably the best defensive coordinator in college football, all his years with the Patriots and running Tom Brady's defense. You can't speak enough about what Caleb Downs and this Buckeyes unit has done all season long, helping out their redshirt freshman quarterback in that offense.
Mm-hmm. A lot of information there.
Lot. I threw everything at the wall. See what stuck.
You know your Caleb Downs. You know your Caleb Downs. That is good. That is good. Well, I think you talk about needing to maybe do a few different things. Sinetti said that there are some things that they have not thrown at the wall yet that you probably might see at this Ohio State game. But notably, Ohio State probably also has done some things that they have not thrown at the wall yet that they're going to try. Signetti saying that he feels like Ohio State really hasn't had much of a challenge this season. No. So this Indiana game is going to be really interesting for them, see how they handle it. Before I kind of, dive into a little bit more about it, what kind of 2-player matchups for Indiana Ohio State do you like about this game?
Yeah, we talked about Smith and Pons. We've kind of talked about Mendoza and Downs. I think it's the other thing you got to look at. How does Mikhail Kamara impact this game? He leads the country in QB pressures. While his stats outside of that haven't been what we expected just because of how good of a season he had last year, he could still make his presence felt. And especially now that everyone recognizes the ability of the rest of the Indiana defensive line, it gets a lot harder to put 2 blockers on Kamara when you have a Tyreek Tucker and a Daly. And then you can bring Hardy from the linebacker position and Aiden Fisher to rush the quarterback. We know how Bryant Haynes likes to disguise his schemes, really more of an NFL-type defense than you're used to seeing at a college level. The Hoosiers have to find a way to get pressure. If they don't win the pressure battle and stay in his time in the pocket, he makes great decisions. and it may not be down the field to Jeremiah Smith. Checkdowns, 3rd and short. Michigan could not find a way to get off the field, and that cost them dearly when it came down the stretch. Ohio State ate up a chunk of the clock really in the second half and just put their foot on the gas, and it looked easy. It looked really, really easy for that offense, and it has pretty much looked seamless all season long. So the Hoosiers and Kamara, Daly, Tucker, find a way to beat those O-linemen, find a way to get pressure. If you can make a mistake, you're going to have a chance to win the game. Their turnover margin hasn't been that good. It's a negative turnover margin. The Hoosiers have the best turnover margin in the country. That's the area that you want to focus on and say, hey, we make a couple of good plays on defense. The offense takes care of the football, finishes off drives, has a majority of the possession. You're going to have a chance to do what no other team on the schedule has done and beat Ohio State.
So do you see this game, let's talk about how whoever wins it, do you see this game being a close one? Do you see that being, last year where it was quite a different score margin between the two? How do you see this game kind of playing out, essentially?
Yeah, it's interesting. You look at what the public perception has been of this game and what Vegas has seen of this game. Indiana started as a little bit more than a one-score underdog. It's moved in their direction. But I think that one-score margin is where it's going to be. These teams on paper have looked very similar, taking care of their opponents, winning the games. The only time Indiana's really struggled has been on the road. And even last year, we didn't see them pull out close victories like they had to do this season. So if you can get into that one-score game in the fourth quarter, we haven't seen Ohio State have to deal with that all year. So I think that's an advantage for Curt Cignetti's Hoosiers. And I like that margin. I don't see it being a blowout one way or the other. I know some people expect Ohio State to do what they did last year. Kalon Black said it. Everybody knows it. This is a different team. This is a different Hoosiers team with real national championship potential. And in the Big Ten championship, I think it's going to show. I imagine it's somewhere in the 20s, 27-20, 24-23, 21-24. I don't know what side it's going to be, but I think it's going to be that close all game long. And then you're going to get an exciting show in the fourth quarter from both of these phenomenal quarterbacks, phenomenal defenses. You're going to get everything you can chew in this football game. It's going to be, I hope, an exciting game, and you want this to be that fourth quarter moment. Who can have their Heisman moment in the fourth quarter? I expect we'll see one of the quarterbacks show up and make the difference.
Well, Indiana plays Ohio State at 8 p.m. on Fox. Make sure that you're following along with us at the Hoosier Network for all your Indiana football needs, and thank you for tuning in.